Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into an essay that proposes a really radical new way to think about historical injustice. It's not about settling old accounts, but about completely re-architecting society so that future opportunities become way more compelling than past grievances.
So, the essay we're looking at today kicks things off with a pretty bold claim that the way we're currently approaching reparations is basically a dead end. It argues that we need a fundamental shift to actually move forward. So, let's dive right in.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to walk through the argument in 5 parts. First, we'll look at the problem, what the author calls the reparations impasse. Then we'll get into the proposed solution, a new architecture and its 4 pillars. After that, we'll see how this is supposed to change the whole narrative. And finally, what the ultimate goal of a forward-focused society really looks like.
Okay, first up, the reparations impasse. Let's really try to understand the problem as the author frames it. They see it as this self-perpetuating cycle of grievance that's not just failing to help, but is actually, in their view, making things worse.
So, the core argument here is that when you focus everything on financial payouts, you're essentially turning historical suffering into a kind of modern political asset. And the author claims this doesn't resolve anything. Instead, it institutionalizes grievance, making it a permanent part of our political world.
And this leads to a really central concept in the essay, what the author calls the grievance industry. This is the term they use to describe this whole network of organizations, lawyers, and activists whose funding and relevance, it's argued, actually depend on keeping these historical claims alive and churning through the system.
So what the source is really laying out here is a fork in the road, right? On one side, you have financial redress, which it calls an unsolvable moral and logistical Gordian knot. And on the other side, you have this alternative path that's all about shifting incentives, making it genuinely more rewarding for people and communities to focus on their own agency and future opportunities rather than past wrong.
Okay, so if the current path is a dead end, what's the alternative? Well, the essay proposes a completely new framework, which it calls a new architecture.
And this quote, wow, this quote really just gets to the heart of the entire strategy. The core idea is that the best way to get over old conflicts isn't to refight them forever, but to make the future so bright and so compelling that the past just loses its grip on the present.
Now, the solution being proposed here isn't just one single policy. Nope, it's a whole coordinated strategy built on what they call the 4 pillars of change, and these are designed to systematically re-architect those incentives we were just talking about.
All right, so what are they? We've got universal economic empowerment, creating legal and institutional friction, something they call organic narrative reframing, and finally, amplifying internal competition. Let's dig into each one, starting with the economic piece.
So the first pillar is all about race-neutral policies that create economic opportunity for everyone. Think things like expanding the earned income tax credit, making it easier to get into skilled trades through apprenticeships, and funding top-notch vocational training. The logic is that these universal programs will naturally benefit the communities most in need, but they do it without the divisive baggage of race-based policies.
And the essay doesn't just theorize, it points to what it sees as a real-world example. It brings up the case of the Maori in New Zealand. There, redress focused on non-cash assets, like health funds, and it reportedly boosted community wealth by over 20%. The key result? It helped shift the entire focus from historical injury to building power in the present day. Okay, pillar 2. This one is all about making that grievance industry we talked about less profitable. The author suggests some pretty concrete ideas, like putting statutes of limitations on historical claims to create some finality, requiring a supermajority vote for any redress bills, and maybe even reviewing the tax-exempt status of nonprofits that spend more time in court than helping communities directly. And they get really specific on how to do this. They suggest a hard threshold. If an advocacy group is spending more than 10% of its money on lobbying and litigation instead of direct services, their tax-exempt status could be on the table. It's a direct shot at shifting the financial incentives of these organizations. Pillar 3 is all about the culture, the narrative. The essay argues for using market forces, and this is key, not censorship, to change the public conversation. So we're talking about things like tax breaks for movies and shows that highlight stories of success and agency, private funding for forward-looking projects, and even using market pressure, like advertiser boycotts, against media that just seems to amplify division.
In the final pillar, this one's interesting. It's designed to break down the idea that any one group speaks with a single unified voice. The strategy here is to actively amplify internal debate and dissent, to show the world the incredible diversity of thought that actually exists within every community. This, in turn, would challenge the authority of any monolithic, grievance-focused leadership.
And, this whole approach would be backed up by data. The essay suggests publicizing research that shows a direct link. Communities that focus on entrepreneurship and agency see real, tangible results, outpacing others in key mobility metrics by 15 to 20%. The goal here is to make a really rational, data-driven case that focusing on grievance just doesn't pay off.
All right, so you've got these 4 pillars. How do they actually work together to shift the entire cultural conversation? Let's look at how they're designed to combine and change the overall narrative.
See, the whole strategy isn't about forcing anyone to change their mind. It's about changing the environment. It's about making economic opportunities so abundant, making endless lawsuits so costly and difficult, and celebrating stories of success so loudly that individuals and groups will just rationally choose the more rewarding path of agency.
And this next quote just captures that idea perfectly. The idea is that our collective memory isn't set in stone, it's malleable. So by incentivizing and amplifying all these stories of resilience and achievement, you're essentially building the cultural scaffolding for a new collective memory to grow, one that's focused on agency.
So what's the end game here? After all this, what does success actually look like according to the author? What's the ultimate goal?
Now, it's really important to understand that the goal described here is not to forget the past or pretend it didn't happen. It's to transcend it. The argument is that a healthy society has to acknowledge its history, but it absolutely cannot let itself be defined and imprisoned by it forever. The focus has to shift to building a shared future.
So in the end, victory, according to this framework, isn't about winning some big debate on reparations. It's about making that whole debate kind of irrelevant. The idea is that when economic opportunity is everywhere and the culture is celebrating progress, that so-called grievance industry just organically loses its audience.
And so, the essay leaves us with this really powerful, provocative question. It challenges all of us to imagine what a society could actually achieve if all of its energy was focused not on settling the accounts of the past, but on creating unlimited opportunities for the future.